Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. We apologize for you having to wait. Today is Monday, 20th of June, 2016. We will now resume proceedings in Finance Committee, and we'll be considering the appropriations to the Minister of Education, Employment, and Gender Affairs. But before we do that, I'll ask Mr. Suku if he will lead us in prayer.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we invite your presence into this meeting of the Finance Committee of the Cayman Islands Government. Father, we ask for your divine wisdom and guidance as we discuss the budget of our beloved islands. We ask, Father, that you bless each honorable member of this legislature and those who have joined us here today. Bless our three islands and all of our people as we work together for the peace, safety, welfare, and prosperity of our beloved islands. Father, we pray for the families of those lost in Orlando, Florida. We pray that you restore peace and love and unity to their nation. Father, while we are grateful that while we have our challenges and disagreements, we do not have to endure such acts of hatred and evil. All this we ask in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Suku. Please be seated. The first appropriation is EGA 1, Policy Advice, Governance, and Ministerial Support Services for $8,838,424, found on page 236 and 237 of the Plan and Estimates. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Bush?
Mr. Chairman, on labor and pensions policy and operational questions, where would you take them? I saw employment services, and I got for labor on that. Where you would take pensions?
Just confer. Mr. Rivers?
Mr. Chair, through you, EGA 3 deals with labor and pensions related.
Employment regulatory activities?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Employment regulatory. So you want pensions questions in that?
Labor and pensions questions in that, yes.
In that. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I have some on those when you get to them.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, through you.
Mr. Bush?
Does this vote deal with the policy advice in education?
It would.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
Through you, the now famous petition from the Savannah Primary School, which if they had taken it to the other schools would have been signed by everyone, is now knowledge to everyone. My question, I know the new education bill that's about to come will probably be said to answer a lot of these questions. I'm sure that's what's going to be said, but still to get things on record, Mr. Chairman. When is how is the policy going to affect that at least up to year 3, every teacher can have a teacher's aide? The resources in let's go with the human resources first. Is that going to be addressed anywhere in the policy? Because it's a known thing, and it's been said in education, Mr. Chairman, through you, that when it comes to getting changes in the inputs into outputs, it's always to get a change in output, you need a change in output, and the formula for staffing numbers at the school and is determining of support staff, etc. And the children in the classrooms keep growing, but nothing changes with the teachers except more paperwork.
Mr. Chair, through you, if I would ask the member to, given that the question relates to, well, primary education in particular in terms of the policy. There is EGA 5, where we'll have a discussion of primary education services. I would prefer to take those questions at that time, given that it's talking about not just policy, but resources as well.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, another one through you. In the Minister of Education contribution to the throne speech, she said that 2 posts were advertised, one for the Director of Standards and one for the school inspector. Is that correct? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, through you, yes, I've been instructed that those are the 2 posts that have been advertised as it relates to the quality assurance unit.
Mr. Chairman, through you. Now, from working on the new education bill, these are posts that are in this new bill. Am I correct, Mr. Oxnard? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, through you, the education bill actually does include a section dealing with quality assurance in the schools going forward, and that's both public and private schools, and so it does anticipate having an office of quality assurance.
So, Mr. Chairman, through you. So, what the minister is trying or saying is that this bill has not been presented or voted on in this House yet. How can these posts be advertised if these are posted in the new bill?
Mr. Chair, through you, this office has already existed. It's just that it has effectively been disbanded due to the inability to hire to those positions. So essentially, it is now trying to ramp up what really should be in effect in order for us to help to ensure the quality assurance going forward. So the bill actually just enshrines what has been policy for many years. What it will hopefully do is going forward, we won't have this situation where you won't necessarily have the necessary resources to carry out the functions of the unit.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, through you. Through you and the minister to the chief officer. For some time, the facts are, we had a deputy principal that was at, not going to call any names, at Savannah Primary School some years ago. And it was proven that, to be kind, it was a complete waste of time. All of a sudden, this individual was brought back as the inclusion specialist. We had another case where the teacher could not handle the behavior of the class and left and was brought back a few months later, become some kind of behavior specialist. Will we continue to recycle these individuals just because of who their friends are or who they are when they've failed in another area? Will these type of things in our education be addressed and stop being allowed to go on in our education system? Because the facts are all here, names, everything, which I will not call. But their transgressions, and then coming back and getting promoted to higher things because of friendship with certain people in the ministry, not the department, in the ministry, it's gone on too long. And I want to know if that's going to be addressed in this section here where you all are trying to straighten or trying to do something.
Mr. Saku.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Kristen Saku, Chief Officer, Ministry of Education, Employment, and Gender Affairs. Mr. Chairman, the ministry is undergoing a massive piece of reform right now, which includes establishment and process of our plan of action. The basis of the plan of action is that it's a framework of accountability. Paired with that, we have constant work going on in making improvements in our recruitment process. And one of the things that we look at is to make sure that we are right-fitted, that persons who we hire are suitably qualified for the post that we hire them for. So to answer the question, Mr. Chairman, when combining the increase in accountability and the progress that we're making in terms of our recruitment practice, I do not expect that to be a practice in the ministry going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Saku.
Mr. Chairman, through you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, through to the minister, would you prefer me, and you have, of course, last year I had the infamous 19 questions on SEN. would you prefer me to hold some of my other stuff on the specialist until we get to SEN?
Mr. Chair, through you, yes, we do have a vote specifically dealing with services for students with special education needs. So if you would hold your questions until that time, would be
Okay,
greatly
thank you.
appreciated.
Mr. Chairman, through you then, on this next section, the MOE is contemplating purchasing textbooks for September. Is this true?
Mr. Chair, through you, I will ask the Chief Officer to take these operational questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, much has been said about the need for us to return to textbooks in the classroom. What we are doing is looking at piloting the return of textbooks for literacy and numeracy. The reason we're piloting it, sir, is that in the past, carte blanche moves were made that were not successful. So we're working with teachers to make sure that what we bring into the system is quality and is going to work for them. And once we have those results, then we will move to expand the provision back to having foundational texts in all subject areas in all schools.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, so you're informing, who will determine what materials are needed? Through you, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the Education Policy Unit in the Ministry has the lead on this initiative.
And may I ask, Mr. Chairman, through you, this policy unit, who is it made up of?
The acting deputy, Mr. Chairman, sorry, the acting deputy chief officer, Ms. Cacho, supported by Mr. Baker and his team in curriculum. We have a numeracy specialist, a literacy specialist, a PD specialist, all in the ministry. However, Mr. Chairman, the ministry works in a collaborative fashion. So whenever we do major initiatives, it includes the chief education officer and her staff, and it also includes principals and staff at schools.
Okay, that was my next question, Mr. Chairman. Through you. So the DES staff and principals and the teachers, you hear me the word teachers, they will be involved in this process?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bush, Mr. Miller is trying to get in a question, I think, perhaps on the same. Mr. Miller, you're fine? Mr. Bush, you want to?
Mr. Chairman, through you. Mr. Chief Officer, there's nothing worse than putting a fox in the hen house. People who messed up the curriculum before, you think this process of our children suffering, 16 years old in the high school, nothing wrong, SEN-wise, can't read and write, is something that happened last year or the year before? Accountability, only in government and only in the Cayman Islands government. Okay, Mr. Chairman, through you, there are quite a few things that have been put in our curriculum that were cut and paste from the UK. In the UK, they have been gotten rid of. Why are we continuing things that have not worked in the UK? Why are we continuing to try to use them here, force them down people's throat? And it has not worked in the great land of our masters.
Mr. Chairman,
That's
the
true.
ministry is currently undergoing a curriculum review. What we're doing as part of that review is looking at the various systems out there and to come to a decision on how we want to move forward with the education system of the Cayman Islands. The UK has reformed its curriculum. UK curriculum is in use in our system. It's also in use at the prep school and Catholic school and very highly successful private schools. I know that there are concerns in terms of the fact that the UK had to reform its system. We are following suit, but we will be looking not just at the UK curriculum, but also at other systems, including Caribbean, Canada, and anywhere else that we can that will have a strong showing and be able to be culturally applied in the Cayman Islands.
So, Mr. Chairman, so you are saying, Mr. Chief Officer, that our private schools are doing good. Why do we have to go back to look at what the UK has? Why can't we just look here at home, talk to our specialists here, look at home in the Caribbean like Barbados and those places that have had success, We don't need to keep on going back to the UK. It's obvious that everything has come from their field.
Mr. Chair,
Is it because certain of your staff can't comprehend anything that's not out of the UK? The people are making these decisions. Is that possible,
Mr. Chairman, through you, the ministry staff is looking at various systems. There is no bias in terms of any one system. We are approaching this from a neutral position to determine what is the best way to move the education system forward.
Mr. Chairman? That's it for now until I get to the SC and I have a lot more.
Thank you, Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Officer.
Mr. Miller, then Mr. Makiva Bush, then Mr. Albasaku.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Minister, we recently passed a lot of amendments to the pension law. Can you tell us when the ministry anticipates these amendments actually being into effect?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the process of putting together the commencement order, drafting the commencement order to bring into effect the provisions is actually in train. I will ask the chief to see if he has any update as to the timeline. But what we do anticipate, and as I said in my contributions, we expect that certain provisions will probably come into effect immediately or shortly thereafter, and other provisions will have a lead-in time and transitional provisions included as well. So depending on the nature of the provision and the effect that it will have, there may be the different in terms of timings, but that is being worked out between the ministry and the legislative drafting as we speak.
Thank you. Mr. Saku.
Mr. Chairman, we are, as the Minister alluded to, we are doing two orders. The first order is the drafting instructions are with the Legislative Drafting Department as we speak. That order will bring in all of the clauses of the law that can immediately be brought in without regulations and without the department needing to make any administrative changes to administer the new law. We anticipate having that order back very shortly, and we're looking to have the commencement done within the next few weeks. The second order we're looking at for, I believe, September of this year to be issued. Some of the provisions will come in for the 1st of January next year, just depending on, again, the need for regulations and also the need for the department to educate plan members and the general public on some of the changes.
Thank you. Mr. Miller.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, can the minister say what specific policies or guidelines have been issued or are going to be issued, and where in this budget are the resources to implement these changes in the legislation allocated?
Mr. Miller, I think the employment and pension questions are in EGA 2, the very next output. We're still on EGA.
That's the mechanics of it, so I have a whole different slope. We're talking policy now.
Okay. Okay.
Because
Thank you.
I don't know, unless the minister is saying that there's no need to issue any policy to bring the legislation into effect.
Minister?
Mr. Chair, through you, as my understanding is that once the commencement order has been finalized and it's approved by cabinet, then that will actually determine when certain portions of the actual amended bill will come into force. So that will take care of I think the policy-related question that you have. As it relates to resourcing, the ministry, as I indicated in my contribution on the budget debate, over the past several years, the ministry has actually increased the resourcing at the Department of Labor and Pension by, I think, approximately 10 persons thus far. And so we have been ramping up the resources in that regards to make sure that the department is better able to deal with, obviously, the responsibilities that fall under that department.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, is the minister saying that the commencement order that is going to be issued in accordance with the bill just passed, which, as I recall, simply said that the law would be brought into effect on dates to be determined by the publication and Gazette of a commencement order, that commencement order is currently being drafted by legal draftspeople, and that includes policy?
That, Mr. Chair, through you, that order will specify which provisions will be coming into force at what time. So that will basically, in keeping with what the law says, that the bill will be brought into effect at a time determined, and that the bill can be brought into effect at different times or different provisions. The commencement order will give that information as to when, which sections of the amendments will be in effect. And there will be the requisite transitional provisions included in that order as well, so people will have an understanding. And of course, as the chief said, there will be a period of public education to follow, so people understand when, which provisions are in force at what time.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, does the ministry anticipate that all of the amendments made to this legislation will be brought into effect during this 18-month budget period?
Mr. Chair, through you, it is anticipated that that would be the case. The timing, as I said, is being determined, but that we anticipate that those changes would be brought into effect within the next 18 months.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to turn to employment. We had this nice report done, 134-page report by the Inter-Ministerial Committee on Employment, June 2015. Can the minister say what policies are being put in place to implement the recommendations of this Inter-Ministerial Committee on Employment, and whether all of the policies, all of the recommendations are being implemented, or which ones are?
Mr. Chair, through you, I will ask the Deputy Chief Officer in the Ministry of Education, Employment, and Gender Affairs with responsibility for this area to speak to those questions.
Thank you. Do you need the question to be repeated?
No, thank you, sir. Dr. Tasha Eubanks Garcia, Deputy Chief Officer, Ministry of Education, Employment, and Gender Affairs. The report, Mr. Chair, that was released in June 2015, as a result of that, what the ministry has done is looked at the 60-odd recommendations in that report to identify what recommendations made by the Interministerial Committee could be explored and taken forward. One of the recommendations of the committee was to look at a national training council. That terms of reference has been drafted. Cabinet has approved the establishment of the National Training Council, and we are currently finalizing the membership, so that council should be active in short order. In addition to that council, and that council, just for contextual purposes, is designed to support in overseeing the work that will take place in training, development, apprenticeship programs through the ministry in partnership with the private sector. So a number of the representatives who will be sitting on that council are from the private sector. That's a strategic move to ensure that the work that the government engages in has the buy-in of the private sector, so that we have their support, both financially and otherwise, to support in these endeavors, but also to ensure that the efforts that we undertake are aligned with the needs of the private sector, to ensure that the programs fill gaps, to ensure that the programs are developed to ensure that core competencies are developed so that there is currency in whatever certifications, qualifications, programs are developed, that they're recognized by the private sector. The other initiative that has come out of the June 2015 report is the establishment of the Ready to Work program, which was launched earlier this year. That was a recommendation out of that report, and that has been developed and has been launched.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
So out of the 60 recommendations, only 2 have been accepted, and only 2 is being implemented over the next 18 months,
Dr.
including a
Tasha?
year that's gone by.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 have been launched to date. There are others that are being explored. being mindful of resources and ensuring that the programs that are developed are robust programs and are designed to succeed. Two have been launched to date. There are other programs that are in train. One of the report speaks about and addresses the recommendation which actually came out of the NWDA task force, which was established earlier, to look at the NWD, exploring options for the NWDA to be a clearinghouse. That piece of work has also, or is being explored in an outline business case, has been drafted, has been reviewed by the business panel review committee. Feedback has come back, and the Ministry of Education, Employment and Gender Affairs is working in collaboration with the Ministry of Home Affairs to complete that outline business case to submit it to Cabinet. And other initiatives, over the 18 months, we're looking at to see what else out of that report can be developed in collaboration with our other initiatives.
Thank you.
To you, Mr. Chairman. So any other initiatives other than these two, there's no funding in this 18-month budget for them?
Mr. Chair, through you, the report, as the members aware of, was called for by Cabinet in order to give us a macro look at the issues. And so the report will be used moving forward to make sure that we try to develop programs, policies that address the issues as outlined in the particular report across the various ministries. So looking at the interministerial report and what it calls for, it will require working and continuing to work collaboratively with other ministries, given that it is an interministerial look on employment. So as it relates to employment initiatives, the budget per se would be, obviously the Ministry of Employment has the budget allocated for employment services, but there are other agencies, ministries, as outlined in that report, that works towards employment-related activities. So the expectation is that those activities would be supported by those ministries with their respective budgets as well.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
To you, Mr. Chairman, I'm still trying to find out. This report was completed June 2015. Today is almost the end of June 2016. The budget that we're currently under consideration takes us until the 31st of December 2017. A lot of the recommendations, if we look at, through you, Mr. Chairman, at 7.3, for instance, has to do with funding. A, many government agents voice difficulties or challenges in preparing and protecting Caymanians so that they can partake in current and future economic opportunities. These challenges include A, funding the delivery or provision of training. Some programs were suspended. B, funding the payment of stipends for training and internship opportunities. C, getting staff to buy in to the benefits of certification and take up training. D, transportation issues for trainees and interns. E, limited access to computers for computer-based training. F, trying to place interns in areas matching their interests. G, limited uptake of outreach programs. And H, scholarships, bonds acting as a disincentive to take up scholarship opportunities. What I'm trying to find out, Mr. Chairman, is having had the report for a year, what policies has the ministry developed to be implemented over the next 18 months? And where in the budget are that implementation of those policies funded?
Mr. Chair, through you, I will start, and if the technical team feels that there's additional information that would be valuable to the committee, I'll ask them to speak at that time. Mr. Chair, since taking office, we have looked at this, as I said, from a holistic perspective. One of the things that we have made available is to address, well, the one that I can speak to directly to the point about funding and funding for these programs. There is a budget that is earmarked, but that would be under the scholarships vote, which falls under, I mean, we're kind of moving into EGA 2 now, these discussions.
I don't want us to talk about the quantities. We can deal with that when we get to each one. I just want to know what areas the funds are supposed to be in so I'll know what areas to questions for these
Sure.
specific policies.
Well, the funding for supporting participants, Mr. Chair, through you, of these training programs, which was identified as an issue previously, that has been captured in the, as I said, the AGA2 and scholarship services, or maybe there's a separate vote dealing with the scholarship budget itself, but it is linked to scholarships in that regard. There's also other programs that have been specifically developed, designed, and launched by and through the NWDA. So again, those fundings would be determined either through the EGA2 vote or the specific other TP votes dealing with education and training or employment-related initiatives. And that is where those things would be actually captured from a budgetary perspective.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, Mr. Bush wanted to ask a question.
In that topic, go ahead.
With respect to policy.
I got plenty more policy too.
It looks like a lot of questions today, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, can the minister say what is the current position of the government, policy position in regards to school budgets being fully devolved to principals versus centrally controlled by the education department? And in conjunction with that would be whether the Principals Consultative Council still operating, and if so, then what is the view of the principals on the question I asked?
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Mr. Rivers?
Again, Mr. Chair, through you, I will start and I will ask the technical team to fill in any pertinent details. To start with the last question first, yes, the Principal Consultative Committee does still exist. It has actually been enhanced since we took office by including additional representation to make sure that there is really a discussion that takes part between the schools, i.e. the principals, the Department of Education Services, and the ministry. Previously, that didn't actually exist with having the three key players in education at the table at the same time. The other question about the devolution of the budget, certainly that is something that, from a policy perspective, I have asked the ministry to look at to see how we can enhance that system. But again, in terms of the details of the system, I'll now turn it over to the technical team to take us through.
Mr. Chairman, the direct question would be on that is, what are the views of principals on it?
Satanya Cacho, Acting Deputy Chief Officer in the Ministry of Education, Employment, and Gender Affairs. Mr. Chairman, through you. We've spoken to principals through Principals Consultative Committee and other types of committees, and I think there are mixed views about the devolution of responsibilities. And we're actually meeting, I think it's next week or the week after, to have a discussion about not just the budget, but other accountability things for principals.
So it has been discussed with principals all over the country.
Not in great detail, but we have had some discussions.
I'll move to another question, Mr. Chairman. Unless members want to ask one on that question.
Sorry. Anyone
I
else?
still have questions about the policy
On
on
policy.
unemployment.
And you're staying on policy?
I'm policy, and I'm not going into employment till we get to that budget.
Okay. Mr. Miller, you had, Mr. Bush, there's Mr. Suku. Oh, you had a question specific to that particular matter?
Principals Consultative.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chairman, if they go on another question, I beg to hold on for a couple of minutes now.
So, continue.
If they have questions on that, then I'll give way.
No, no one does.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I would think that this could be policy or budget, but direct budget I would mean, but PTAs have resorted to starting online petitions to get the resources they require. Can the minister tell the committee what posts have been created in the department and ministry since 2013?
Mr. Chair, through you, I'll have a moment to confer with the technical team on that particular question.
Sure.
No deep discussions. And Mr. Chairman, since they're looking, and I've asked about the posts being created in the last 3 years, can they say what administration posts are contained in this budget also, since we're talking about the posts?
Mr. Chair, I'll ask the chief officer to give us details about the staffing.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure I understand the question. Members asking for a list of positions filled or added since 2013?
Yeah, you can give a number. I would like to see the list. If you have a list, you could give me a copy. But rather than take the time of the committee to read all of them, if there's a lot, then give me the number and then give us a copy of the positions.
Mr. Chair, through you, just to be clear, you were asking for numbers of positions as it relates to education, given that the ministry deals with education, employment, and gender affairs, and all that encompasses, correct?
Well, we're dealing with just education at this point. And as I say, that PTAs, so that it would be education. Schools. And I don't know if you're counting the...
Sorry, you want positions as it relates to the schools as well?
Well, the question was, and I say it, and let me repeat it. PTAs have resorted to starting online petitions to get the resources they require. So I'm asking, can you tell us what posts have been created in the department and ministry since you took office?
Okay, so that helps to clarify. Thank you. So we'll make sure that we'll include all education-related posts.
And I also asked what administration posts are contained in this budget.
Okay, thank you.
And if you're not getting the money, please say so. That'll make the thing shorter. Because if you move around and skedaddle, we're going to have to
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. To the member.
Mr. Chair, through you, in terms of positions added since 2013 at the Department of Education Services, which includes schools, one assistant teacher for SciFec, one numeracy coach, conversion to create a deputy principal at Bodenton Primary, one teacher at Savannah Primary, one teaching and learning coordinator for Clifton Hunter, 3 behavior support assistants for inclusion, 1 Key Stage 3 teacher for inclusion, 1 school inclusion team manager, 1 SENCO at Lighthouse School, 2 assistant teachers at Lighthouse School, 1 deputy principal at Savannah Primary, 2 early intervention teachers at Student Services, 1 therapy assistant for Student Services. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Well, just, I beg your indulgence. 1 second. Mr. Chairman, in addition to what I just read off, we have in this year's budget 5 positions for education. What we don't have, Mr. Chairman, is over the course of the last few years, because of the austerity measures, we have converted posts in many instances. I couldn't give you that information right now. So what I presented you with are net new posts, but in the interim, there have been a lot of conversions of existing posts to different job descriptions.
Thank you, Mr. Saku. Mr. Bush, you,
Mr. Chairman, I will still in policy, but I'll give somebody else a chance.
okay. I think Mr. Saku was waiting for a question on policy for quite some time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you. With regard to the baseline inspection report 2015 and the KPMG report as well, can the minister say what the policy is in regard to addressing the issues? But before saying that, can you indicate whether or not there's agreement with the findings of the report and what is being done to address the recommendations and the issues identified?
Mr. Chair, through you, given that the inspection took place with a kind of the independent third-party approach, nothing has come to my attention to basically dispute them per se. So certainly we are using the reports to target the kind of school improvement actions and policies and programs. And so what was done in immediate response to receiving the inspection reports in the summer of 2015, over the summer period, then the plan of action for 2015, 2016 was developed, and then it was rolled out at the beginning of the term in collaboration with the principals, in the sense that there were meetings held at each of the schools to discuss the new way forward as it relates to addressing the key concerns of the baseline inspections as it specifically relates to individual schools as well, because the inspections had an overall summary report, but they had individual reports for the individual schools. So that was what was done to address the recommendations. And so the plan of action for 2015, 2016, which is being carried out as we speak, addressed the specific recommendations as it relates to the inspection reports, and also some of the concerns that were highlighted in the education governance review. The plan going forward, the development of the plan of action for 2016, 2017, is kind of in its final stages now too. I spoke to that during the budget address, where there were 6 workshops that took place with key stakeholders, ministry, department, school level, where everybody came together, collaborated, and talked about, the year in review of what happened during this year, but also what then the focus going forward to continue the implementation as it relates to addressing the specific concerns. And a key part of that program is accountability, as I did speak to as well. So that's what happened, and that is what is intended to happen going forward as it relates to the addressing the concerns specifically that were raised in the inspection reports.
Thank you. Mr.
Thank you,
Saku?
Mr. Chairman. Through you again. So does this plan of action have the full budgetary support that it needs to address the issues and to get the concerns addressed and resolved? Do you have full budget support to be able to do that?
Mr. Chair, through you, as with many of the areas that we heard during the Finance Committee up until this point, there's always a challenge with resources. And so to sit here and say that we have the entire budget that's needed to fulfill the implementation across the system at this stage, I'm not in a position to say that. We have a budget, and we're going to work with that budget to try to address the concerns as best as possible. And some of the concerns, as I had highlighted before, had to do with actual, not necessarily the dollar value being the concern, whereas, that I can't say that that's not a concern, but certainly the issue was to do with the hiring of resources itself and the civil service headcount concerns. So that, to answer your question, is obviously the constraints which we're working under, but we certainly have a plan to try to get innovative in addressing and working around those particular constraints if that does continue to be the case.
Did you have the money or not? Did you ask for the resources?
Can I,
Did you
can I,
request it?
can I
Mi-
have
mi-
order? Can I have
Mr.
order?
Chair, through you to the member, I requested the resources given what we were presented.
Money.
And we have what we have, and we're working to the best of our ability to achieve.
Did you ask for the money?
If I may ask that the questions be done in an orderly fashion.
That's what we're trying to do, Mr. Chairman, trying to get an answer. But she's a lawyer.
If I may just say, for the benefit of the listening public and everyone in this room, the constraints placed on the hiring of civil servants has nothing to do with the government withholding money for that purpose. It has everything to do with the moratorium that the deputy governor put in place, and everything to do with the fact that the FCO is concerned about the size of the civil service, and that includes garbage men, engineers, teachers, doctors,
We know
everyone.
that, Mr. Chairman. We know that.
So
Did she
please
ask for the money?
please ask the questions with that in mind.
Oh, I always figure out the FCO.
Thank you.
Did she ask for the money?
Mr. Suku?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you.
Answer that, Al. Did she ask for the money?
Trying to remember my question.
Ask for the money. The money.
In terms of priorities, because I understand the constraints, I understand how the FFR works and how the FCO wants to limit hiring and contain the size of the civil service, but you must have the ability to prioritize within certain areas. So you might have to cut in one area and boost up in another. Has any of that sort of discussion taken place where, I mean, where does education stand in terms of government's overall priorities? I think is what my question is.
Mr. Chair, through you, certainly as Minister of Education, it is the top priority from my perspective, and certainly it's with respect to, you know, as I said,
Mr. Chairman, I'm asking overall, the overall government, no, not the minister. I understand that's your ministry, so it will be your priority, but
Minister, are
The
you
entire
able to
government.
answer that question on behalf of the entire government, yes or no?
Mr. Chair, through you, no, I'm not in a position to answer that on behalf of the entire government. I think the appropriate person would be to direct that question to.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, though, really, it is fair enough for us to ask whether the minister asks for the resource in form of cash for the budget to say, I have $1 million for this or $1 million for that. Now, I understand your defense about FCO. You're not going to tell me about them. But the fact is, if the minister asks and you all didn't provide, that's what we want to know. If she didn't ask, then we want to know that.
Minister Rivers?
Mr. Chair, through you, I asked for the budget that was given to me by the ministry when we went into our budget discussions. In the end, we were allocated a different budget, and so we have now a budget what we have, and we have to work with that budget to the best of our ability.
Thank you. Minister Rivers? Minister Rivers, were you the only minister who did not get everything you asked for?
Mr. Chair, through you, no. As I said, many other ministers did the same.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, you have a question, sir? You were continuing.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the Labor Force Survey report fall 2015, which was obviously conducted after the Interministerial Committee of Employment laid their report. Say, and this is a policy question, Mr. Chairman, but I need to lay the groundwork for the question. That Labor Force Survey said that in fall 2015, there was 1,732 unemployed persons, and the unemployment rate was 4.2%. The unemployed were mainly persons who were 35 to 44 years and older, 26%. Females 35 to 44 years and older, 26%. Females 60.4%. Caymanian 69.8%. Given that statistic and the recommendations of the Interministerial Committee, how can the Ministry of Employment support the government having a policy to increase the number of work permits by 2,000 for the period that this budget is under consideration for the 18-month period.
Mr. Rivers, did you understand the question? Would you like to rephrase it? Mr. Miller?
The question is, how can the ministry responsible for employment support a government policy that requires 2,000 new permits to be issued during the next 18-month period in order to fund the budget?
Mr. Chairman, through you, as the member knows, and as I've spoken to on a number of occasions in this chamber, and one of the reasons why we call this interministerial committee to begin with, the issue of employment and employment-related policy does not lie within one individual ministry. The policy that the member is referring to is an immigration-related policy as it relates to the issuing of work permits under the immigration law. So certainly that is something as it relates to, the appropriate questions there would be to do under that particular heading. So as it relates to employment, the purpose and the policy as it relates to trying to get as many people gainfully employed as possible is working, as we're seeing the numbers are decreasing, the numbers of unemployed, that is. Certainly we will continue to do so through targeted programs that we have established. And I'm speaking specifically now within the Ministry of Employment and the agencies which the ministry is responsible for, that being the NWDA as a primary vehicle. Programs and initiatives will continue to be put forward to try to improve the employment prospects for those persons who are still seeking employment.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, is the minister suggesting that individual ministries make policy independent of cabinet? Where is my understanding that any policy to go forward requires full cabinet agreement? Anybody objecting to policy, because it's not a vote situation where a majority vote.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Miller, just so that, to see if I understand what you're saying, are you saying that the 2,000 number with respect to work permits is a policy?
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Miller?
Mr. Chairman, the minister is saying that it's not a policy.
Mr. Miller, the reason I'm asking is because my understanding would be that the government has had for quite some years a policy of granting work permits, but a projected number of 2,000 work permits does not translate to a government policy. Because there's a general policy and there's a projected number of work permits.
So, Mr. Chairman, these 2,000 new permits projected in the budget, right, all is scheduled to produce $6.9 million in additional revenue for work permits. The question I'm asking of the employment ministry, given the fact that we have at the time, we had 1,700 people unemployed. Or maybe she can tell me how many Caymaners are unemployed today. Then I'll ask a different question.
Mr. Chairman, maybe I can help the member from Northside who is proceeding, I believe, on a completely false premise. The number of work permits projected to be granted is not a policy of the government. It is a consequence of the government policy, which is about economic growth and economic opportunity, creating economic opportunities and employment. The business community is responding to the government's policies by expanding their businesses and hiring more people. Part of the consequence of that is more work permits and therefore more work permit revenue. The member proceeds on the basis that by clamping down on work permits, refusing work permits, that somehow creates more economic opportunities and more employment for Caymanians. It is a completely fallacious premise, and one which will have disastrous consequences for this country were we to follow it.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, with respect to the question you asked just prior to the Premier speaking, as to the exact number of unemployed people today, we have to look at it from the context that the way we determined the number of unemployed people in the Cayman Islands isn't based on those registered at the NWDA. It's based on the labor force survey that's conducted twice a year by the Economics and Statistics Office. And as with all surveys, other than a census, there's a margin of error. So there's a plus or minus 2.5% margin of error in the labor force survey. So it's not an exact number, it is a very good estimate. And the most recent survey was conducted in April, but the results are not yet available. So the only results we have available to us would be the number from October 2015. So in fairness to the minister, she can't give you an exact number of unemployed Caymanians today.
I agree with you, sir, but they're the ones that say my numbers are wrong. I never produced none of these numbers, sir. The SPS in December, same time this labor survey, fall.
Yeah, in fairness to even the SPS in December would not have had the actual results of the October 2015 labor force survey.
Got it.
So that would have been perhaps using numbers from the April 2015 survey and perhaps some improvements since that, estimate since that.
Let's give the government the benefit of the doubt that part of what the Premier just said has a factual basis. Your SPS projected 488 new jobs in this budget cycle by true growth of GDP and the economy. Let's say it's 500. Let's say I can even give you the benefit and say you might create 1,000 jobs, but the economy really takes off and we get 5% growth instead of 2%. We have 20,000 permits existing. We have, let's say it came down from 1,700 in the fall of 2015 to today, there's only 500 Caymanians unemployed. Based on your projections, and I agree we can't be that specific, if we have only 500 instead of 1,700 Caymanians unemployed now, and you get a 500 growth in jobs, zero. All the new jobs that are created during this cycle are taken up by the 500 unemployed Caymanians. Given and take that they're people qualified for it. Okay? Where then does the demand for the 2,000 permits that is projected in the budget, or is that an unrealistic number, come from? Because, Mr. Chairman, the only how to bring people in on permit in that scenario is to take jobs that Caymanians already have away from them and give them the people on a permit.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
So I go back to my original question to the Ministry of Labor and Employment. What policy has been put in place or is being put in place, is being funded in this budget to increase employment of Caymanians?
Mr. Chair, through you, I certainly can speak to what has, again, that goes on to EGA 2. If the member is happy to...
Mr. Chairman,
because
either we have policy being done at the ministry or policy being done at the administration
well,
level.
Mr. Chair, through you, the policy as it relates to assisting employment of Caymanians is being effectively carried out through the NWDA. So the policy is to try to work with those persons who present as extended registrants, those that want actual assistance through the NWDA, and the policy as it relates to that is to actually work with them to try to assist employment. The other policy that's being put in place is to develop this link, which has happened since we took office, the database that was created to create a link and a nexus between those jobs that are registered, those persons who are registered as in seeking employment. That information is now readily available to the immigration department, who ultimately makes a determination through the boards or the administrators as to which permits to grant or not to grant. Now they have full access to this information electronically. That system was launched in 2014. So as it relates to policy, the overarching policy is and always has been to take best efforts to try to find suitably qualified Caymanians in the first instance, and when that is not available, then obviously the issuance of work permits would be available in order to assist the department and the administrators and the boards to make those determinations whether or not a work permit is warranted. What has been implemented as a result of that policy is this database connection between NWDA registrants, both from the job seeker as well as jobs, and now the immigration department having this information at its fingertips to be able to ask what questions they think they need to ask in order to make the determinations that is required of them under the immigration law. So as it relates to increasing Caymanian employment, we do have some numbers that we can provide if necessary, but that is delving into another vote. So I hope that has answered the member's question as it relates to the policy for employment.
Thank you, Minister Rivers. I do have several questions, and we've spent approximately 1 hour on this particular appropriation. So I'll allow one more question from Mr. Miller, Mr. McLean, and then Mr. Bush. Sorry, Mr. Eden. Mr. Eden, my apologies. My apologies, Mr. Eden. My sincere apologies, sir. And Mr. Bush has another. So,
Mr. Chair, through you, sorry. I've just been informed by my staff that there is some additional, because the member had previously asked the question about how many policy initiatives emanating from the Interministerial Committee on Employment is being carried out during the next 18 months. We only had information to hand at the time about what was happening from the Ministry of Employment's perspective, but I am told that we have additional information at this point that we can share, and I think it would be helpful for the committee to know this as well.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's 5 main areas of the Interministerial Committee report. I've gone through the 5 areas to identify which ones are being pursued so that you can have numbers to answer the previous question given. So the area for increased investment in training and development, there are 23 recommendations. 9 of those are being pursued by the Ministry of Education, Employment, and Gender Affairs. 12 of those are either recommendations for ministries outside of ours or require collaboration with other ministries. The section under increased integration with and coordination of support and services and identification of services that meet the needs of job seekers, there are 13 recommendations. 2 are being pursued by the Ministry of Education, Employment, and Gender Affairs. 10 are outside or require collaboration with other ministries. The third area is engagement with private sector, public sector, and civil society. There are 8 recommendations. 3 are being pursued. 4 are outside or require collaboration. The fourth area, improve labor market information. There are 4 recommendations. They all fall outside or require collaboration with entities outside of our ministry. And the 5th section is to address sociocultural impediments. There are 3 recommendations. 1 is being pursued by the Ministry of Education, Employment, and Gender Affairs. There are 51 recommendations in all. 15 are being pursued by our ministry. That's 29%. However, 30 recommendations are outside of our ministry or require cross-collaboration. So there are 21 recommendations that can be pursued directly by this ministry. Of those 21, 15 are being pursued, or 71%.
Thank you.
Just one final question.
Yes, sir. Mr. Miller.
Who is accepting the responsibility to coordinate the agencies outside of the Ministry of Employment to get this report implemented?
Put 'em on the show. Through you, Mr. Chair, as you know, this work originated out of an interministerial committee on employment. What needs to happen is that committee needs to be recalled to take the next step of the work. Our ministry does not currently have a mandate to direct these affairs. It is centralized. It requires multiple agencies to work together. And of course, it's coming at a time when all ministries are dealing with various projects under Project Future and other areas as well. Not to give an excuse, but to give an understanding of the level of work that is involved in everything that we are trying to accomplish right now. What it would need is a coordinating body to be identified by the cabinet, and then we can take the work forward in stages.
Thank you. Mr. McLean, then Mr. Eden, then Mr. Bush, and then we'll take the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I just want to touch briefly on that and talk about the introduction. This interministerial committee on employment, and the introduction says in July 2014. That July has become a real bother to us here in Parliament recently. In July 2014, the Cabinet approved the creation of the Interministerial Committee on Employment. Its purpose is intended to promote better collaboration between Cayman Islands government agencies on matters pertaining to the challenges of unemployment and ensure a coordinated and holistic response to efforts at addressing the needs of the country in relation to employment. 2.5 years, 2 years. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I would like to, under policy, go in the direction of policy regarding dress codes at our public school, and like to hear what the policy is and if it has been changed recently.
Thank you, Mr. McLean.
Mr. Chair, through you, there has been a revised dress code policy, which was implemented certainly since we took office, and I will ask the chief officer to give us the details as to where we are with that. But that certainly was something that I know we dealt with within the last year or two. I believe it was as early as September 2014, but I do stand to be corrected on that particular date. So I will ask the education team to give us more details on the actual implementation and how that is actually being rolled out at the school level. I will ask the acting chief education officer to give us the details at this time.
Mr. Chair, Lynette Monteith, Acting Chief Education Officer. In 2014, there was a revision of the uniform policy, and a policy was established. And this policy is due to be reviewed this year. This is in all government schools.
Thank you. Mr. McLean?
Mr. Chairman, I want to specifically ask about children being allowed to wear their hair on their shoulder, and piercings for boys in their ears, in their nose, in their lip, in their tongue, in their eyes. I want to know if that's a fact and why that is so.
Mr. Chair, through you, the decision to allow students, boys in particular, to have their hair long and tied back, and also the decision with regards to earrings was an agreed decision amongst all principals.
Thank you. McLean, do you need time? And
Yeah,
you can-
yeah, need time recover here. Let me coach this right. What does the principals have to do with setting policy with regards to our schools, and in particular, dress policy?
Before you answer, Minister Rivers, I just, as everyone else, sat and listened this morning when one side was asking to ensure that principals played a part in setting policy. And now you're asking what part do they have to play in setting policy. So if anyone else is confused, I'll ask the minister to explain.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not confused.
I am.
And if you are, let me try
I am.
disabuse you or
She's-
unconfuse you.
She's going to ask a question, but I'm confused.
Yeah, but you jumped into it, so let me explain, sir.
I follow-
Policy
I follow
with
you.
regards to education,
I follow you.
not policy with regards to the morality of this country and the schools.
I follow
Wanna
you.
Deal with that one now.
I follow you, Minister Rivers.
Mr. Chair, through you, and this is the catch-22, the double-edged sword, the however else you want to, this is the issue that we obviously are always grappling with, because on the one hand, people feel that you need to have more involvement. On the other hand, people feel you should have no involvement. The position taken is that to do with the schools are the one that is responsible for implementing the policy. The schools are the ones that are there on a daily basis and deal with the issues. So to say that they should not be able to inform policy is not the way to go, because they're the ones that ultimately have the ability to say what the issues are. And so ultimately the ministry sets the policy, the recommendations will come up, but the recommendations certainly should include the participation of the views of the people on the ground. And so therefore, when the policy was established and it was clear that there needed to be a revised policy that clearly delineated what is acceptable at the school level, the approach taken, in keeping with the approach that we have taken all along, certainly since taking office, is to try to include the key decision makers in developing that appropriate policy.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. McLean.
honestly, this country or this government needs an adrenaline shot where we can get to the point where we, the political directorate, set policy on how our children carry themselves to school. Let me go back to 2007, when the now premier was minister responsible for education. And he set a policy through cabinet that there would be no long hair, that there would be no shirts out of pants, that boys would have no piercings. Hair had to be cut to an acceptable level or the kids wouldn't come to school. And everybody agreed on that. And here we are now being told that the principals are in agreement with it, and that's how it was promulgated. No, Mr. Chairman, something is wrong with this. We parents have to take responsibility, but we must too. And I don't want to hear anything about human rights because I got a constitution in front of me. I don't want to hear anything about human rights because it says in the such minimum standard imposed in the interest of public order, public morality, or public health as may be prescribed. Isn't it public morality to say how their pants must be around their waist,
and how violent the hair is cut, and whether or not they should have earrings in their ears and in their nose. Mr. Chairman, we, the 18 of us, and in particular, the 7 that is now government, is letting this country go. And we're blaming it on human rights. We need to put systems in place in this country. What do we expect? I went to a graduation the other evening and kids were in there, boys with their hair on their shoulder. You mean tell me in high school we can't control how our children go to school and what they look like? This has nothing to do with religion or anything else. This has to do with morality and control.
Thank you, Mr. McLean.
Mr. Chair, through you, just for the benefit of the committee, and to make it very clear that the policy that has been adopted, which is the expectation now, the ministry has set the policy. The expectation is that the schools will carry out the policy. Now, whether or not that's happening at every school at all time, I certainly can't sit here and say yes to that. But let me finish, please, sir. The policy that has been accepted by the ministry and that has now been translated to all the schools is uniforms, and it's very prescriptive. Uniforms should be properly fitting. Skirts are required to be no shorter than 1 inch above the knee. All students are required to wear black shoes or sneakers that do not contain other colors. Boots, sandals, and slippers are not allowed. Small plain stud earrings without gemstones are permitted and should be worn in the lower earlobe. Except for a watch, no other jewelry should be worn. And it goes on to say, please note, students at the Lighthouse School are not permitted to wear any jewelry to safeguard the health and safety of the students and staff. Items that display connection with gangs are not allowed. Example, badges, tattoos, colorings, or tagging. Hair should be groomed and, if worn long, be tied back with a black or brown hairband for health and safety reasons. Hair is required to be natural color, and extreme of hairstyles, such as mohawk, shaved lines, or words, are not permitted. No beads should be worn in the hair. Shaved eyebrows are not permitted. Makeup, nail polish, and false nails are not permitted. This is the National School Uniform and Dress Code. Again, this was something that was developed in collaboration with the educators, in keeping with the spirit of making sure that information is fed up as well as down. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, do we hear anything in that policy? Earrings in the lower lobe. Why is it that our children needs to wear jewelry in school?
Mr. Chair, through you, and I believe that is one of the reasons why the acting chief education officer is saying that the policy is to be reviewed. And so these obviously will be some of the considerations.
It was reviewed before, and we put earrings in our boys' ears, and we give them long hair, and so you can tie it back. And Mr. Chairman, I've seen kids going to school with this roting. I don't know what called. What is? Cornrow, a keen row, or whichever keen row. Mr. Chairman, you got to tell me we are allowing our children. Honestly, say what you want about Alden McLaughlin, but I don't know where he's gone now. I don't know where he's gone now. But he's still here? Oh, yeah, he's still there. And say what you want about Roy Borden as well. But there had to be some degree of control. And they're wearing their pants down across their hip, down across their legs, and pulling it up every minute. We must not allow these kids to enter our schools. Mr. Chairman, we expect any better that Northwood Prison is full all the time when we allow them and allow parents to do as they please in our institutions where we are responsible within reasonableness to provide. Mr. Chairman, I don't believe in the police state. I don't believe in absolute outright control. That is after you become an adult. But we have responsibilities to those who are beneath that age of majority. And if we don't step up, what's the use of us being here? They're taking us over. We are creating a new set of people who, when we're in the evening of life, they're going to create problems.
Thank you, Mr. Eden.
Thank
Minister Rivers, what are the consequences of a child not adhering to the school dress code?
There are consequences, Mr. Chair, and I will ask the acting chief education officer to tell us what those are. But again, just for the benefit of the listening public, all that the member has said about pants below the knees and all of that is a clear violation of the policy which has been set, which is to guide what is appropriate and not appropriate on the school campus.
Mr. Chair, through you, the schools work closely with the parents to ensure that students come to school properly groomed as per the uniform policy. And they also have a tiered system of consequences to deal with students who do not who do not adhere to the uniform. So there are a series of things that can happen at the school level.
Could you elaborate as to what those things are? What are the consequences? What does a tiered approach entail?
Okay, Mr. Chair, through you, as indicated before, the first point of contact is contact with home to remind parents and inform them about this contravention of the uniform policy. Persistent or habitual non-wearing of the uniform in the proper way can lead to counseling for the students and extend into detentions, etc. Obviously, the approach isn't just about being punitive, it is about ensuring that the students are reminded about the expectations of the school with regards to the policy, guided by the policy.
Mr. Chairman, if I may. And I ain't gonna press this no longer because I'm getting a headache from it. Mr. Chairman, I am not concerned about the consequences of not following the policy. I'm concerned about the policies. The policy needs to be kicked out. And we need to stop this policy about earrings and about hair tied back for boys and cornrow. Whether we say Mohawk or not. I think I wrote it down here, something about you can't be in Mohawk, but you can be in them old cornrow. Mr. Chairman, I don't want to hear about the consequences of not following that you can wear a ring, but you can only wear one. Earrings are out.
Thank you. I think I didn't want to say this, but it's not often that I would say I agree with Mr. McLean with respect to certain issues. But I do believe that he does have a point with respect to some of the things that you see children going to school, the way they dress, the way they conduct themselves. And one of the things that I think we as representatives need to take responsibility for is that we need to be frank with parents and say to parents, you have a responsibility to raise your children and to ensure that your children comply with rules and regulations. The school can only provide an opportunity for education. It is for the parents and the children to ensure that they do everything necessary to get that education. The more the schools have to operate as policemen, then the less emphasis, the less time they have to deal with actually educating the children. We as representatives need to stress that to parents and not be afraid of them saying to me, I may not vote for you. Life is bigger than a vote.
But
Absolutely, Mr. Chair, if I can just to that point, and I maybe for the benefit of the members in here, to your point, reminding the parents, certainly at the high school level, what has been introduced, again, to deal with the whole like behavior management and following policies, etc. There is a home school agreement where it is a tripartite agreement where the school sets out what their obligations are, the parents have their obligations, and the students have their obligations. And each of those parties are to sign off at the beginning of the year what their respective responsibilities are. So certainly as legislators, if we can remind the parents in the schools to say that they have agreed to work with the school to carry out the obligations, and one of those obligations would be to ensure that the policies are adhered to as it relates to their individual schools.
yeah, but Mr. Chairman, I certainly agree with your dissertation, and that at all times, whenever we can, as legislators, we should. But where do you all stand? You, the government. Come on now, Mr. Chairman, and you are a high member of the government, and the minister is the Minister of Education, and you have a government in operation, and you don't need to come here to tell us that we should be doing so if you're not doing so yourselves, and if you are not making certain that it is done, because it is you who are the policy makers in this country, not the backbench, not the opposition. In fact, I beg.
I think it was.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's just a matter of stating that the policy is there and the agreements were there to pick up on the chairman's point about speaking to parents and letting them know that their obligations exist as
Minister.
well. That was the only point I was making,
No,
Mr.
Minister,
Chair.
you need to do more. You need to make sure that your responsibility for your money, that you have the responsibility for the schools, that is carried out.
Mr. Chair, through you, as the member will know, as it relates to the actual administration of the schools, that is something that does not fall within my purview. My purview is setting policy and helping, along with the government, to create the framework as it relates to holding people accountable. That's one of the reasons why we have built a plan of action to increase accountability, because whether or not the policies are carried out at the school level, that is something that the school would then, the school leadership is responsible for carrying out those policies.
I
The
see.
department is responsible for overseeing, and then the ministry, of course.
I see.
That was the point of developing the
Mr. Bush,
policy.
We all
I
can't
listen.
speak at once.
Yes, the whole point was to develop a policy that addressed the concerns. Now, the fact is, people are saying that they have issues with the earrings along here. That might very well be, but what emanated from those discussions with the principals and otherwise was, we can't say now, girls can wear earrings, but boys can't.
Who says so?
Because of the issues of, well, you're discriminating based on.
We
So-
don't believe that.
No.
That's where you need to come in.
now.
No,
perhaps-
but I, okay, again, and this is
Let's
a
change this thing and
philosophical
get it right
difference.
once and
This
for
is a
all.
philosophical
Once and for all.
difference. I believe if we say no earrings, then it's no earrings across the board. There
No.
should be no reason why some should and some shouldn't.
No.
But again, these are the things.
Where you come from?
Mr. Chairman, we know how children are. We were children ourselves. A friend of mine used to wear a T-shirt one time when we were going high school, and it said, "Stop discrimination, hate everybody." Stop earrings. Girls, boys, indifferent, this one, that one, I don't care who it is. We know they'll use it as a weapon against them. Why is it that we encourage 90% of our children, Mr. Chairman, I am convinced, I have watched them, do their parents do it properly? I am convinced of that, sir. But just like how we have SENs in our schools, and it's only 5 or 10% of them that is being left behind, that their child should be left behind, there is 10% of those parents who don't care and send their children in a manner that influences the others. We need to stop it. And if we don't stop it, we are responsible for creating a culture that this country is going to suffer with in years to come.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. McLean. Mr. Eden, you have a question, sir? I know it's been a long time.
We should hear an answer about where the government is going, though, Mr. Chairman. And I know you don't like crosstalk, but I must step in here because you gave a dissertation, which I acknowledge, which seems to say that all of us needs to be doing something, and I agree that all of us has our responsibilities as representatives of the people, and we should stand up and tell the people where we believe things are wrong. But again, the minister and the cabinet is responsible for the direction of the schools. They can blame any teacher, and too much of that is going on in this country, where the teachers are getting all kind of blame, all kind of hell, parents are beating them, and then they must come to school and say what good people we are. No, they are humans. And I say that this place starts with policy. And if the minister can't do it, then leave the room.
Mr. Eden, do you have a question, sir?
Yeah. 100 of them are not going to answer.
I'm scared what I'm hearing here this morning, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully I can end it up into a question. I hate to kick a dead horse, as the old people say. But I will go back to when I was a member of the Progressives Caucus. Over a year ago, if I'm right, it was suggested that education would be the priority for this year. Education would be the priority. Mr. Chairman, just to draw an illustration, over a year ago, my 4 colleagues from the District of Town met with the higher-ups in education, begging, pleading, identifying ways that we could improve. Subsequently, the baseline report came out, probably last year or earlier this year. Mr. Chairman, it is my understanding, by listening and reading between the lines, that a lot of action that is going to be needed will not take place until 2018. Colleagues, we don't have the luxury of time with our children, especially at the primary school. We must deal with what it is. If you have to go back and reprioritize, and I know I spoke with the Minister of Works, and he explained to me things that I don't fathom, where certain funds are appropriated. But I'm begging and pleading this honorable House that we find out how we can close these gaps. We cannot wait any longer. We're going to do more work on the John Gray High School, which I know is badly needed. What's the good of working on this if when the children are coming out of primary school, we're having all of these problems? Some of them can't read, some can't write, some that I know in specific areas can't even spell as much as a 3 or a 4-letter word. What's happening that people is not picking up on this? Something is dreadfully wrong. I'm old-fashioned, 71 years gone, but by God, these kind of things didn't happen in the past. Something is wrong, and whatever happens, we need to find out.
Thank you, Mr. Eden.
And I beg, the question is, Mr. Chairman, that government or all of us try to find out how to support education. We can't wait any longer.
Thank you. Minister Rivers?
Mr. Chair, through you, I just want to thank the member for that plea, because certainly that is a plea as Minister of Education, as I said before, is a plea that I have, and I do what is my responsibility to advocate for education for as best as possible, for as large of the pie as possible, to address the needs. As I said, to reiterate for everybody's benefit, when these inspection reports came out, when we had a clearer picture as to where some of these gaps were, especially as it relates to interventions, the budget was put forward to address those issues. We all know and recognize that there are constraints, and so as I said before, as with every other ministry advocating for their ministerial responsibilities, no one got what they asked for. But I certainly put forward the argument on behalf of education to get what was needed to address these issues as were highlighted. Now, I want to also thank the members for their contribution as it relates to the school uniform policy. Certainly, we will take that feedback on board as it relates to the fact that there is a review imminent. So I just want to make sure that the members are aware that the dialogue will not be lost on deaf ears.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I did have
Mr.
those on policy.
You have a question on policy? After Mr. Bush, we'll take the vote.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Bush, sorry,
Can-
go on.
can the minister say what is the policy in the academy approach to school governance, which the minister announced would be introduced into the Cayman public school system?
Minister Rivers.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just thank the member for that question, but also a bit of a correction. I never did announce the introduction of an academy system into the education system, and I want that clear and I want that on the record because that is often said and either misinterpreted by members of the media or otherwise. What I did say and what I've continued to say and why I called for the review, asking for recommendations as well as it relates to how we can increase the kind of public-private partnerships in education, looking at how we can draw on not just the goodwill of the community, but also the willingness of the wider community to participate, be it through the parental level, community level, private sector level. So that is still a policy. It's one of the 6 policy priority areas that I spoke about, looking at increasing public-private partnerships in education. And so we are currently looking at a way to do that, and the ministry has been tasked with looking at developing a draft business case as to how we can actually implement a system that increases the kind of participation of the community as a whole in the delivery of public education.
Thank you.
So that is not something that will be instituted, it is something that you are discussing as a policy matter, Mr. Chairman? That's not something that is a decision already made. That's what you're trying to say. No decision has already been made. It is a matter that you are discussing.
Minister Rivers, I think he's asking, is it still at the policy discussion level as opposed to implementation?
It is still at the discussion level in terms of how we look to increase the partnership of the community, how we actually move forward with that. So that there has been no formal decision as to what that will take, what shape that will take, what form that will take, or moving along. So it's still at the consideration level because I'm still waiting for a formal proposal from the ministry itself.
And that is academies I'm talking about.
No, the academies in particular, no decision has been taken to introduce an academy system in the country.
So where is that discussion? Because there were some preliminary discussion at least. So where is that taking place at this point?
As I said, there has been always a discussion from the very beginning about how do we look to increase this kind of partnership in the public education system. There was never any clear determination to move to any one system, academy, charter, or otherwise, but for some reason that notion has become in the public domain. But the discussion about increasing this type of partnership is certainly very much still alive, and we are looking to, I've just been informed by the team that they will have a proposal by the end of July.
Mr. Chairman, the specialist support for special education, we all recognize is critical to our public school system. Can the minister say what requests have she made that is not met in the budget? We are getting complaints from parents regarding the lack of contact time for our most vulnerable students.
Mr. Bush, that question comes under EGA 7.
You want to put it there?
That's where it should be, EGA 7.
All right.
Special needs.
For special needs?
Yeah.
All right.
Mr. Bernie Bush, 3 questions. If you have more than that, choose the most important 3. Then I'm going to the vote. You had a long time at the start of this question, sir, on policy. You were the first person to ask questions on policy.
We really
It's
need to
always
get
me
some
every year when it
Ronaldo.
comes to education. Mr. Chairman, through you, when the Deputy Chief Officer was talking about the principals, earlier on last year, I asked the Deputy Governor, because in talking to the principals, they said they had no power when they found a bad teacher. The Deputy Governor assured me in this House that he would give the principals or the chief officer, I don't know who, can't remember exactly which one, that if they found a bad teacher, they could be removed, because the fact remains is that once that teacher is bad, you've just ruined a whole class of 25 children for a whole year. And when they go to the next year, the teacher now is trying to make up for what should have been done behind. And this is what, in my research, has been happening. What is the new policy now that the governor has put it in your hands, that you all now have the power when you find a bad teacher to get him or her away from our children for that as quickly as possible and get a good teacher in there that our children in that class don't suffer?
Mr. Chair, through you, there's no new policy in that area, Mr. Chair. What we're doing is what the law requires. The disciplining and management of teaching staff falls under the Public Service Management Law. What is happening is that that law is being abided by. In the context of schools, what it means is that if we're talking about an incident, principals, or you don't want...
Not incident, just a bad teacher. Right. Not necessarily one incident.
This is all taken up, Mr. Chair, through the plan of action. So what we're looking at is a robust approach to performance management, where principals are observing their teachers through walk-ins, through meetings, and through other avenues, looking at student scores and those kinds of things, to ensure that the teachers are actually performing at the level they should be performing at. That then will lead to recommendations coming from the principal up to the Chief Education Officer for discipline or for non-renewal if it is a non-Caymanian teacher. In following PSML, if you observe the sections of the personnel regs, you will see that there's a process laid out for disciplining staff for non-performance or poor performance over time. One of the things that we've discussed recently is how we're marrying that section or those sections of the law with the performance management that is being done at schools to make sure that at the earliest possible opportunity, we can get a bad teacher out of the system.
Thank you. Mr. Bush.
Our poor children. And earlier on, when the deputy officer also spoke about the consultation with the principals and so forth, Mr. Chairman, through you, there is a disconnect, just like how it is with that education ministry with the primary schools, and I say that without any apology. There's also a disconnect with a few principals and their staff. A perfect example, there's one principal, if I hadn't pulled the minister out at Sports Day, was talking about cutting more PE time. And the minister clearly stated at Sports Day, it will not be done under her watch. I was watching the so-called principal's face when it was said, and it was a beautiful thing to watch. When you're doing this consultation, is it possible that could you please also bring in teachers? There's no doubt that you all know some of the good teachers in all the primary schools. Some of the primary schools got some good teachers. Also consult with them as well. Is that possible, please? Instead of just the principals, because the principals, some of them are bringing their opinions and not consulting with the teachers.
Mr. Chair, through you, I do want to thank the member for that well, that request, but also to inform the member and this honorable house that certainly since taking office, I've had, we've met, we've convened a teacher forum where we have representation from every school at the teacher level, and we meet with them, and we've met with them on at least 4 or 5 occasions thus far. We've had multiple teacher forums where we actually, members of the ministry and DS and the actual teachers themselves will, and it's primarily for teachers to express themselves, to put forward their ideas, their concerns, and then we look to inform policies, as I said, going forward to make sure that the teacher's perspective is taken on board. So I just wanted to advise the House on that. I've also been informed that the ministry has met just 2 weeks ago with teachers as it relates to the curriculum review that the acting deputy chief officer also spoke about as well. So certainly it is something that we appreciate and understand the need to do and continue to do going forward.
Mr. Chairman, through you, my final question, number 3, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chief Officer, a lot of your teachers are very scared. And when I say scared, I mean scared to speak out because of what has happened in the past to others and what will happen to them. They felt they've been let down because they said they were promised that they had brought forward. So maybe it's time, Mr. Chief Officer, I know you got one of the hardest ministries to deal with. Maybe yourself or Ms. Cacho go down there and talk with those teachers in a closed environment where none of the people in between you, since the minister may not be able to do it because you have to separate the civil servants from us. But all of those in between yourselves and your teachers, take them out of the equation. And my last question is the baseline support, the report. The school, we know, we heard there's only 2 primary schools passed it. We've yet to hear what happened with the school where the new principal just took over at the gentleman who seems to be quite nice, just took over. And what was the report on that school? Because I heard that only 2 primary schools or only 1 primary school passed. What was the report on the Clifton Hunter and the John Gray or George Hicks, whatever it's called these days? So much schools up that side, we're confused. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you could just give us a moment to get the information as it relates to the baseline inspections for the individual schools.
While we wait for the answer, I just want to let everyone know that we've spent approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes on this first appropriation. So in all fairness, we've spent a significant amount of time, and I tried my best to give each person ample opportunity to get their questions across, but as everyone would expect, we can't spend all day on just the first appropriation.
Mr. Chairman, in that regard, perhaps because there are so many questions and there are questions coming to us and complaints coming to us from parents, from other persons in the community, perhaps you might need a midway discussion on it, particularly subjects that taken a lot of time to unravel matters or for people to get answers. Perhaps a midway discussion, perhaps something like a sectoral debate could take place. I know that takes time, but at least we wouldn't spend all our time at this point where we are rushing, it seems. Maybe a sectoral discussion on things like education should be done in the chamber.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. They can always come in the form of parliamentary questions, which then I think enables you to ask, and so. I'm new to this, so I just know there are parliamentary questions. So.
Madam,
Minister Rivers?
Mr. Chair, I just to make sure I understand the question from the member, you want to know what the overall rating was for the Clifton Hunter and John Gray High School as it relates to the inspection reports? John Gray High School. As it relates to there were 5 different areas where they were given a rating of either unsatisfactory, adequate, good, or I think there was the higher one.
Madam Minister, at no time did we hear that the other primary schools had 5 sections. We heard they failed.
No,
They didn't.
Mr. Chair, through you, if you read the reports will outline the areas that the schools were assessed on. Each school also got an overall assessment. So looking at the report for Clifton Hunter, the overall assessment for Clifton Hunter says overall effectiveness of the school is unsatisfactory. As it relates to John Gray, it was a similar statement. And I don't want to be misinformed or misinforming it was also the overall effectiveness of the school is unsatisfactory. So that was the overall, but then the reports go into detail about the areas where the actual schools were assessed on, and some schools that were deemed unsatisfactory overall may have been satisfactory or adequate in specific discrete areas. So that's what I was referring to. If you look at the reports are detailed on a school-by-school basis, and then there is an overall report. So again, Madam Speaker, Mr. Chair, the reports have been used. They're not sitting on shelves. They've been utilized very extensively to inform policy and policy decisions going forward as it relates to providing for the resources and addressing the needs. And that's why I refer to the plan of action that was implemented, that was rolled out this year, and the continuation for the next year. So to allay anybody's fears about the ministry doing multiple reports and sitting on shelves or getting buried and whatnot, these reports have been actively utilized in the decision-making going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, and then we'll vote. You still want to ask a question, or?
Chairman, you can take the vote because I'll ask the same question and then that's where I want it.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor of EGA 1, Policy Advice, Governance and Ministerial Support Services for $8,838,424, standing as part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. Just to inform everyone, we will take the luncheon break at approximately 1:20 p.m. 1:20 p.m. EGA 2, Employment Support Services and Scholarship Administration, $2,418,415 on page 238 and 239 of the plan and estimates. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bush?
Mr. Chairman, I have some questions in regards to pensions.
That's EGA 3, sir.
Employment
And regulatory
activities. And labor are going to be under that as well?
Yes, sir.
But where is the employment support? That says EGA 2 where we are, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
EGA 2 is support.
Then I want to find out then, Mr. Chairman, what happened with the, wait. You counting employment regulatory activities, EGA 3, as labor. But what is EGA 2, employment support services? We all understand scholarship administration, but what is employment support?
Anyone want to elaborate?
That, Mr. Chair, through you, that deals with the activities of the National Workforce Development Agency, primarily, as well as obviously the work of the ministry that to supports
Okay, Mr. Chairman, that's one
employment-related
then.
services.
Mr. Chairman, to the Minister, can she provide a list of the number of labor non-compliance cases that are being prepared for prosecution?
Again, Mr. Chair, that is under EGA 3, because that would be under the Department of Labor and Pensions. Those are that department is the department that deals with the actual enforcement of the
The regulatory?
correct. So if the member will hold that until we get to that vote, I'd be happy to.
And pensions can be under that as well, you're saying?
Yes, sir.
If there are no questions, then
On
okay.
we want to make sure, Mr. Chairman, and for clarity, so that people understand, scholarship administration, can the minister say what are the guidelines on the amounts that a child could go? Is a child that going to UK get more than a child that goes to perhaps a US? Is there two different, if government is giving 25, 20 or what? And can you state that amount?
Mr. Chair, I will ask the manager of the scholarship secretariat to provide us the details as it relates to the scholarship.
Mr. Chair, Deirdre Carmola, Manager, Scholarship Secretariat. To answer the member's question, there is no difference in terms of location. There is a difference in terms of the level of study. So if you had undergraduate study, there's a different amount. Postgraduate study, a different amount. If you'd like, I can clarify what those amounts are.
Thank you.
Sorry? Yes.
Okay.
I would like to know what's the most a student can get.
Okay, so at undergraduate level of study, which is associate bachelor level study, there is 20,000 CI per annum for up to 4 years. And so associates would be the first two, bachelor would be the second two.
So the undergraduate is 20.
Yes, sir. Per year for up to 4 years.
I thought you said something else.
No, it's
Sorry.
differentiating the two levels of undergraduate study.
On the undergraduate.
Yeah, so you'd have associate level and you also have bachelor level.
On the undergraduate, then it's 20,000 per annum. Per annum.
Yes, sir, through the chair, sorry, yeah.
If someone went in to do their masters,
If someone's wanting to do masters through Mr. Chair, they would have to, not have to, but the funding that's available for master level studies is CI 25,000 per annum for up to 2 years.
3,
2.
2 years.
2 years, sorry.
2 years.
2 years? And that's 25.
If there's someone wanting to do further studies beyond master level studies, there's studies at the PhD level. That's up to 3 years at 25,000 for a total of 75,000.
25. These are all per annum.
Yes.
Right? And that's up to 3 years.
That's up to 3 years. And through you, Mr. Chair, we also have the medical specialization scholarship, which is 30,000 per annum for up to 4 years. For medical specialization, which is normally after they complete their postgraduate study as a medical doctor or
So medical.
medical specialization.
Oh. How much is that?
30,000 per annum for up to 4 years.
Mr. Chairman, on the point of clarity, I wonder if she can tell us, while we're hearing these, if we are receiving that reduction in the UK. Remember, if you, what is that? 12 years, 6 years ago or something?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that reduction was where students were roughly being charged around 3,500, 4,000 pounds. But since that, all home fees across the board are now 9,000 pounds. And that will increase depending on the type of program being undertaken. So you can see undergraduate studies go right up to 12,000 per annum. And also, it also depends on whether that child is noted or labeled as a home student, and depending on that jurisdiction as well.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's what I was looking for, because I've had that own experience. I got him registered as an God forbid, but as an English resident, and then it dropped from £35,000, so like 9,000 or something.
Mr. Bush, you were,
No,
okay, thank you.
on that.
Mr.
since,
Miller?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, how many universities offer bachelor programs that are less than 20,000 per year?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, for the member from Northside, we don't have a specific number of universities that offer below 20,000 in terms of tuition. What we do know is that in the Caribbean, students can study with, say, 20,000, and that will cover tuition, housing, books, flights, those sort of necessities. Now, you can find a few U.S. universities where their funds are capped around 25 or 26,000. Those are still regional accredited and highly competitive universities, but they're smaller than the state universities. In the UK, you cannot do any studies for under 20,000 at the undergraduate level. You can at post-secondary, but you can't at undergraduate.
Is there any correlation between the specific employment needs of government and the award of scholarships and offering those students full scholarships and bond them to government, because there's a specific need for government to have these people educated?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is no specific correlation at this time. There used to be, where students were bonded back to the government, but then it was on the government to hire those students. In terms of providing a full scholarship, the maximums I gave are the amounts. Now, what students have been able to do is, because of the private sector stepping up, is to amalgamate 2 scholarships in order to cover all of their costs. And so they can use the government scholarship or the private sector scholarship and top up with either top up with the private sector or top up with the government scholarship, so that they get enough monies to cover their costs.
More specifically on the medical specialty scholarships. Yeah, if I correctly, you said that was 30,000 CI per year for 4 years.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes.
Where are these board certifications available at that price?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the board certifications aren't the medical specialization. The board certifications come once they complete their MBBS, which is at the undergraduate, postgraduate level. The DM that they do at the medical specialization is where they specialize then to practice in a particular field and become a specialist. But the certification is prior to that, where they do and get their licensure.
You're saying that the medical specialist scholarships that you offer are separate and apart from board medical for professional board certification like FRCP or MRCP?
Through you, Mr. Chair, can the member clarify what
In other words,
MRCP is?
For a medical specialty in surgery, right? You're not considered a surgeon unless you are a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons in the UK or the Canadian, right?
Yes.
You're saying that this medical specialty scholarships that you offer is medical certification separate from that after you get your MBBS?
Yes, sir. Through you, Mr. Chair, yes. You would get an undergraduate scholarship, for example, go and complete your MBBS. There's then an internship opportunity for students, and that is separate to the medical specialization. The medical specialization comes in after those persons have been licensed to practice as an MD and are now choosing to specialize into something like what you've named. Whether that's
The medical specialists that you offer scholarship for are post MBBS and registered as an ordinary medical doctor,
That's correct, through the chair.
but they are not board certification specialists that you are funded. they're not, what kind of medical specialists are you funding?
It's not, through you, Mr. Chair, it's not that they're not board certified. I was just making clarification that they can specialize, for example, in oncology for 4 years and be certified through those processes of becoming an oncologist. But that would not take place until after their MBBS and their internship, and they've been licensed in the islands to practice, or licensed in whatever state they've completed their medical degree in.
Does the government have any agreement with other countries that would allow this board certification for, say, an oncologist for 120,000?
Gentlemen, I do hope we realize that we are dealing with scholarship questions here, so when we get to the issue of scholarships, then that would obviously limit the number of questions in that area. And we'll vote quickly on that one.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think what Mr. Ezard is asking is something that has to be answered by the HSA.
Thank you.
They blame you. Mr. Chairman, you're talking about CDB1 for $40,000 that has been reduced from $42,000 as scholarships. This is where they say that they wanted the questions.
No, we haven't reached CDB1 yet, sir. We are on EGA2, employment
I know you
services.
haven't reached CDB1 yet, but that's only $40,000. Reduced from 42. Okay, I just looked at the figure. When I finished primary school, I could read and write, you know.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is TP30.
Sorry, Ms. Seymour, what was that? Sorry. TP.
Sir, that's TP30.
TP30.
But that's the actual funding for the scholarships. You want to leave the questions till then? No problem.
Ms. Milk, is that what you're comfortable with? You want to leave the question until that output, TP30?
Unless we vote for the scholarships at the same time, because there's
These questions
Yeah.
are into the scholarships. I mean, you can continue the question. I'm just saying to you, these are scholarship-related questions. So, okay. Mr. Suku, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, in terms of awarding of scholarships, how do we prioritize the specific learning areas? Oh, you want me to tell scholarships?
No, your question is appropriate here because this is the administration of the scholarships. So your question is relevant here.
Mr. Speaker, through you, if it's Mr. Speaker, yes, Mr. Chair,
don't
if
worry.
it's appropriate.
I know what I am. Don't worry.
Thank you. If it's appropriate to take, given that there is the overlap between obviously the questions as it relates to scholarship versus administration, I'm happy to take the vote on both at the same time if people want to deal with that.
Yeah. So you guys want to do that, or you want to separate the questions? Fair enough. Mr. Suku, you want to just address Mr. Suku's question then?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in terms of making priority, there was back in 2010 a priority listing set by what was known as a review committee that had been set up through the Education Council. And so based on that, there's an order that we review and look at to see that students are within those areas. The more, how I'd say, you can expect that there's a priority listing that is more applied to the postgraduate level of funding than it is to the undergraduate. Not that undergraduates are not prioritized, but it is to ensure that undergraduate funding is allowed and then necessary funding is applied for those doing postgraduate study.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, through you, so that is about 6 years ago that we set that priority listing.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
And has it been updated any time since?
In Through you, Mr. Chair, in 2013, there was another priority listing that was approved by the Education Council as it related to postgraduate study.
Thank you. Through Mr. Chair, so does that list contain any sort of technical and vocational priority?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the TVET, Technical Vocational Studies, are a separate area to postgraduate funding.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll just add that the Education Council has actually prioritized funding for technical and vocational education and training as well through the council's guidelines. So they have actually stated and recognized that funding needs to be available to support TVET related work, and therefore funding is available. And I believe there is a list on the ministry's website that kind of gives an overview of some of the, I don't think it's an exhaustive list, but it gives a good indication as to some of the actual TVET related courses that would be given consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up again, in terms of the priority areas then, were they determined by looking at where the demand was in the marketplace, in the labor market? For example, where we're granting the most work permits?
Through you, Mr. Chair, 1 second.
Mr. Chair, in the meantime, I think I'd like to add, because this is still within the EGA2 vote as it relates to the kind of work of the NWDA and the training and the kind of the apprenticeship scheme, which is being rolled out. And we have 2 new apprenticeships that's actually now being finalized and being rolled out. The funding for that is being supported by the scholarship vote, but the actual matching of the actual apprenticeships to it, the anticipation is that we will continue to develop programs to match these areas where we do know that there is a high percentage of persons on work permit. So that's where there's a bit of overlap in terms of the program development and the funding to support it. So they're the actual scholarships for like the tertiary or the degree, diploma level type funding for the programs, which is available through the scholarship secretariat as well. But there's also funding available for kind of local training, apprenticeships, and the actual training programs that are being developed locally, as well as overseas, but supported by the kind of apprenticeship model, which the ministry, through the work of the NWDA, is beginning and has begun to actually roll out in earnest in the last 2 years.
Thank you.
Through you,
Through
Mr. Chair,
Sorry.
just to give clarification to Mr. Saku's question, we had gone out in 2013 to the Ministry of Home Affairs asking that they collaborate with the Immigration Department in terms of giving us a priority areas of study, especially when we were looking at the postgraduate study. And so that was where the information came from when council made that decision and gave approval on the priority area.
So in a indirect sort of way, you're saying that it possibly could have come from work permit data, but you're not 100% sure.
Well, we asked that it come from the Immigration Department.
Okay. Going back to NWDA, I'm assuming that this vote is the operational side of NWDA. This is what funds NWDA. How much of this budget, this vote is driven by the NWDA task force report?
Mr. Chair, I will ask the Deputy Chief Officer in the ministry responsible for this area to answer the specific questions in this regard.
Through the chair, while we haven't sat down and looked at the outputs in relation to the task force report, what we can say is that when internal audit did an audit of the task force report and provided their report to us in December of 2015, what they reported to us was that of the recommendations, total recommendations in the task force report, 90.74% or 49 recommendations had been implemented. There were 4 or 7.41% of action steps recommendations that were in progress, and there was one action step, one recommendation that had not been moved forward. The one that had not been moved forward was related to developing supports and systems to address the needs of small businesses. That work is being taken forward by the Ministry of Financial Services under Project Future. So all except for one of the recommendations has been moved forward, which means that they all inform the work that's taking place at the NWDA.
Okay, so is the making NWDA a clearinghouse for jobs? And I have a private member's motion coming up soon asking for that all jobs be, especially jobs that lead to a work permit or application, be mandatory that they have to be registered with NWDA. Is that now part of the policy? Is that coming forward?
Mr. Chair, through you, that policy that you have outlined in terms of your private member's motion also echoes the policy that has been set by certainly myself as Minister of Employment, and as it relates to moving towards having this kind of clearinghouse process, and we've already started to work on that by ensuring that the nexus, as I said back in 2014, February if I'm not mistaken, the launch of the link between the NWDA and immigration, so you could have that flow of information to the decision makers as it relates to work permit. That was carried out under this government, under this administration. The NWDA and the ministry is through the Project Future umbrella. I think the Deputy Chief Officer spoke to it earlier when she talked about the business case that's in train now, and it's just now, I think, being reviewed and commented on and enhanced by the Ministry of Home Affairs as it relates to the immigration side.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one quick follow-up, and I'll beat up on your chief officer a little bit. Why haven't we released the NWDA task force report?
Mr. Chairman, through you. Quite awkward, sir. The vetting of the report did take a while in terms of us getting, because we, as Dr. Garcia alluded to and the Minister alluded to, we wanted to make sure that there was an independent body reviewing this report, that it wasn't just the ministry saying, yes, we got this report and we've implemented all of the recommendations. Getting that to internal audit took a while, and of course they then did a robust piece of work on it. Once we receive that, we are doing some final checks and some final cosmetic changes to it, and we expect to have that report to Cabinet shortly, at which point the Minister intends to publish it.
Thank you. Mr. Connolly, then Mr. Miller, then Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the Minister. In this EGA number 2, we talk about assisting or improving access to employment for Caymanians. In my constituent clinics, I'm getting a number of people who basically have said that they're highly qualified, they've got all the professional qualifications for jobs that are put in ads. And when I'm going to reference, they've said that they've applied for more than 50 jobs in the last 2 months and have not yet even gotten a response. Is there some policy or some direction of moving for whistleblowers legislation that will address the Caymanians, job seekers who are feeling that no one's looking out for them? And also, what is the policy on work permit ads in newspapers where we know the tailoring of job descriptions going on? Like, and here we talk about monitoring, etc. What happens when you find something like that in a newspaper that you know is clearly designed to stop any other applicant other than the person? So what I want to know is, what are you doing to assist those Caymanians that are qualified, that don't need training, that are just looking for a job but not getting any of the appropriate responses, et cetera, back?
Mr. Chair, through you, I will start and then I'll hand over to the technical team to provide some of the details as to what is being done. But certainly, as it relates to assisting persons find employment, the NWDA has had success in this regard, and there's an actual, I think they have a track from the period of July to May of this year, and I believe the number of persons that have been successful in finding employment through the services of the NWDA is 239 persons. So there is progress as it relates to the NWDA assisting people, and the as it relates to the job advertisements. Again, you did indicate that the advertisements are related and are linked to the immigration regulations as it relates to work permits. So certainly the ultimate decision as it relates to whether or not that law has been carried out the way it should be prior to making a decision would lie with the work permit board, the administrators. But I know the NWDA does also do some work as it relates to the JAWS, as it relates to the jobs that are registered with the NWDA. So I'll now ask Dr. Tasha to say exactly what that is.
So in February 2014, in collaboration with the Department of Immigration, the NWDA launched an immigration interface that was developed by Computer Services Department. That interface ensures that immigration is aware of all persons who have applied for a post through the NWDA portal. Immigration is aware of who applied. They have access to those persons' resumes. They have access to the notes that the employer has made as to the outcome of the recruitment process. That information is shared with the respective job seeker. They have an opportunity to provide additional information, which is seen by NWDA and the Immigration Department. Should the employer, at the end of their recruitment exercise, decide to seek a work permit, on the application it asks what the job number is of the advert that was run with the NWDA. Those adverts that are run with the NWDA are vetted internally by the NWDA before they are posted, and not all adverts that are posted with us are approved in the first instance, depending on the content of the advert and whether or not it is in contravention within the laws or appears to be crafted to disenfranchise Caymanians. Should the employer seek a work permit application, immigration then looks up that job advert or searches it by company name, and they'll be able to see a list of individuals who have applied for that advert through the NWDA, the comments that the employer made as the recruitment process, any comments as shared by the job seeker, and are then able to make a more informed decision as to the granting of a work permit. The NWDA also has a representative that attends board meetings to support, to capture any feedback so that we can develop and further refine the interface so that it meets the needs of the Immigration Board and its administrators, and to provide any additional information. When information is received by the department with regards to unfair recruitment practices, reported unfair recruitment practices, or ads that have been crafted, that information is shared with the Department of Immigration, and there's an open line of communication between the Department of Immigration and the NWDA to share that information back and forth so that the boards and the administrators are aware of what we have been made aware on the ground.
Thank you. Mr. Connolly?
What are the results from any of those, I guess, activities? Meaning, when people say, I've been discriminated against, I've seen an ad, etc., do you have actual statistics saying we reported this to immigration, immigration denied a work permit, and or interviewed the person who said that they were discriminated against?
Yeah, that information isn't, through the chair, that information isn't captured in a central repository, if you will. It's provided to immigration, and if an application out of that goes to immigration, then immigration has the opportunity to take any necessary action as governed by under the immigration law.
Mr. Chairman, through you, how do we know that we're improving access to employment by Caymanian professionals and job seekers then if there's no kind of feedback in terms of the the mechanism, i.e. the reporting mechanism, the, what actions the immigration department does, and then what comes back. Because again, when constituents come to their office, they don't want to hear that we have a dialogue with immigration. They want to know what happens to them, right? i.e. I've applied for 50 jobs. I don't get any response. I report that, but nothing seems to happen. So we need to be seen to be doing things. And to me, that would be a report is filed, a report has been received, an action has been taken, and a response has been given, and we're tracking that. I mean, that would be a linear kind of progression. If we're not doing that, is there any scope or thought about being that direct?
Mr. Chair, through you, the system that we have in place now, and I want to thank the member for that question, and this ties back to the ultimate goal of the clearinghouse. What we've put in place so far in terms of the work of information being fed from the NWDA to the immigration through the database link, as I said, that has been launched since early in our tenure, allows, and it's been actually amended as we've gone along, it allows for persons, employers to put on record, so to speak, their views once they've taken in somebody for an interview or not, as well as the employees. So there is a repository of information as it relates to what happened, the outcome of the interview, how the employer felt, how the employee felt, all of that information. As I said, currently it is a one-way street because we now need to fill the gap of making it information flowing between the immigration department and the NWDA through the clearinghouse mechanism, which we are working on as we speak. But again, as I said, we'll now require that collaboration to move it forward. It allows for the decision makers at the work permit end to know exactly, to see exactly what has transpired during the interview process, because it allows for this information to be readily accessible. Now, to your point about tracking the outcome, again, that the outcome or the decision of a permit being granted or not granted sits obviously with the immigration department, and that's now where we need to try to get that information fed back into the loop, and that's what we're working on with respect to moving the clearinghouse process forward.
Mr. Chairman, just one final question in terms of that process now, the clearinghouse. Where in the budget do we have enough money to cover that and to get that in process and up and running so that next year we're not asking these same questions? Because again, like I said, when constituents come to our constituency clinics, they're feeling like they're being left behind. The government isn't looking out for them. And part of my response to them is, oh, well, we're going to make this a clearinghouse and everything has to come through here and blah, blah, blah. And the next question for them is, when? And when is it going to help me as an individual?
Mr. Chair, through you, I mean, these are all valid questions because, of course, if you are in that situation looking work, you want to know what is happening along that lines. We do have a budget from the Ministry of Employment's perspective as it relates to the work that needs to be done to move this process forward. I will ask the Chief to speak to any details he can provide at this time.
Mr. Chairman, I'll let Dr. Garcia give the ETA on the clearinghouse, but without going into details, I can confirm that we have an amount budgeted in this financial year to carry out the works that are necessary. Some of what will be needed will have to be procured, Mr. Chairman, so I wouldn't give the dollar value, but needless to say, yes, sir, needless to say, Mr. Chairman, it is sufficient to carry forward the work and to complete the project.
Mr. Chair, in regards to the ETA for the business case, the outline business case has been drafted. It met its February 29th, 2016 deadline. It was submitted to the business case review panel, who did review it and provided feedback to the ministry. That feedback is being taken under advisement as we revise the business case. We are working with the Ministry of Home Affairs and have a meeting with them this Thursday at 2 o'clock. They've engaged Deloitte to support us in engaging in the work necessary. that needs to be done both on the immigration side and the NWDA side in terms of business process restructuring in order to ensure a streamlined process that connects and closes, as Minister referred to, closes that gap between the NWDA and immigration. So we are meeting with them on the 23rd with a view to have the business case completed within the next couple of weeks to submit to Cabinet.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just again, just to cut through all of that and go, when is it envisaged that the national clearinghouse for all jobs in the Cayman Islands will be in place? That's what I want to know.
Mr. Chair, depending on Cabinet's decision, when the OBC goes to Cabinet, it's Cabinet's decision to make as to whether or not they accept the recommendation in the business case, or if they would like to make any changes to that recommendation. But as soon as Cabinet approves, the business case will be to Cabinet within the next 4 weeks. The draft should be finalized in the next couple of weeks. So it's for Cabinet then to determine the next steps, whether or not they're agreeable with the recommendations in the business case.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, you had a question, sir. Then after Mr. Miller, Mr. Bush.
Going back to the scholarship administration.
Scholarships.
Yeah, he says he's going back to the scholarship, which I want as well. But while the NWDA is in the chair, can I ask her?
Sure. Okay. Sure.
Okay, if the member from Northside.
Mr. Miller, he wants to ask a question of her. Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to get it clear in my head and to the listening public. 2 years ago, I came in here and fought tooth and nail for a young lady who'd gone off, gotten a scholarship, government scholarship, got a master's with distinction in hospitality. Department of Tourism, for some reason, even though they had said she was a diamond, the two private sectors that sat on the scholarship said she was a diamond, came back and couldn't get a job. She went to the NWDA. Someone recommended Burger King. And the young lady really got, because she'd already bust tables. She didn't want to necessarily start, but had already paid some dues. So you're telling me, us are telling the country that this system, someone like her, a job appropriate for her educational level and experience level, will be told to the immigration, there's no need to renew John Doe's work permit because we have Sally Brown here ready to take over. I can do the job. Is that what the system will do or can do?
So the system itself will not assess the suitability of an individual for a post. What the system will do is ensure that the employer is aware of who is interested, available, and who believes they're suitably qualified for the post. Through the recruitment activities, it is for the employer to determine whether or not they believe that person is suitable. At the same time, it is for the applicant to demonstrate, and they have ample opportunity through the system to do so, to make their case for why they believe that they are suitable for the post in question. It is then for the Department of Immigration, through the administrators and the boards, to make a determination as to the granting of a work permit. But the system will allow a platform to capture information from both the employer and from the applicant themselves, the job seeker, so that immigration can make a more informed decision on the granting of work permits and everybody can make their case.
So, Mr. Chair, through you, just to make it very clear and very kind of cutting into the basics first to make sure everyone understands. Currently, as we have now, and what is to be rolled out kind of in this national clearinghouse where all jobs would then be through the NWDA once we have the system in place, that is, when a job is registered with the NWDA and somebody applies through that portal, that information is captured in real-time electronic version. So if that job ultimately then goes before the work permit board or the administrators for work permit, the administrators, the board can log on and see, has there been applicants to this position and what has the outcome been in terms of that actual recruitment process. So that's how the information is being provided. Currently, that's already in place for jobs that are registered with the NWDA and anybody that actually applies through the portal as it stands, indicating their interest, that is.
So, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman, through you, the other example that I've used in this house before, I took a bilingual Caymanian who had managerial experience, very good recommendations from the business where she worked that had to downsize. It was a family business. She was the only non-family member working there, left to look over the cash, left to order things, everything. Bilingual. Took her to an establishment where there are people who can't even speak English good. She was interviewed and she was asked a question. Do you want a career or do you want a job? Luckily, she said, well, I can get a career if you give me a job. She never got the job. Just to prove my point, the next week I took a schoolgirl there. They offered her a job immediately. And now this is the first one is a mother of two trying to save her mortgage. So what is in place with all this NWDA policies and so forth that we can get? And the thing about it, the person who interviewed her is someone from another country who has 7 of his family members working in that company, all on permit. How do we get around that problem with this system? Thank you. That's the final, Chairman.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, as it relates to the decisions relating to the grant or not granting of a work permit, that decision is made at the immigration or the work permit board level. What this system is trying to do is to make sure that if that individual had applied for that job, if assuming that job was actually registered with the NWDA, if that individual then went to the job interview and didn't get the job and wanted the immigration department and the boards to be aware of it, they can put that information in the system and say, well, actually, I was asked this question, and this is the response I was given, blah, blah, blah. So there is an actual log of what happened. So the complaints previously, before people would say, well, I've applied, and nobody, the companies have said, well, nobody has applied. So it was a he said, she said type of situation. What this system does, it gets rid of that he said, she said, because it's an electronic record of who has applied and what the outcome is as it relates to, is this person hired or not? Is this person that is a position put forward for a work permit or not? And that is where increasing the transparency in the system was really critical, because before you heard about people applying for jobs and those applications falling into file 13 with no ability to see and know who has applied.
Thank you. Mr. Miller? Mr. Miller?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, given the statistical fact that many Caymanians who successfully complete their university education and government scholarship are currently unemployed, is the ministry giving any consideration to implementing a policy to prioritize the spending of government funds to positions that are available in the civil service and bonding those recipients specifically to come back and work in the civil service?
Mr. Chair, through you, as it relates to the policy about bonding students to come back to work within the civil service, that's obviously a decision that would have to come under the POCS, the Deputy Governor. So that's a question that you might want to put to him as it relates to the actual bond, because as the manager spoke, I know many, many years ago, and I don't know when the change was made, but many years ago, you did have to be bonded to work for the government, but somehow that change was made at the policy level, I'm assuming. But as it relates to bonding to the civil service, that's a question that would be through the POCS. However, I would ask the Deputy Chief Officer to speak to more information about what has happened as it relates to now requiring students to be registered with the NWDA so we can have a better nexus and understanding of who's available for work and what are their areas of training.
Through Mr. Chair, There is a policy now in place that will be fully implemented by September to require all scholarship recipients to be registered with the NWDA. This will allow us then to longitudinally track where our students are and to ensure that when they're returning then from school, we know who they are and we're able to support them in that transition back home as they seek employment. Also, it allows them to access the other programs of the NWDA, including the National Internship Program, so that if they don't have access to employment opportunities when they're home in the summer and during various breaks, they can access the support of the NWDA Training and Development Unit for that, as well as the other training and development opportunities that are offered free of charge at the NWDA for Caymanians. As far as the statement that the majority of our graduates are now unemployed, in terms of those registered, unemployed Caymanians registered with the NWDA that have degrees, as of May, we have 11 with master's degrees, 43 with bachelor's degrees, and 28 with associate degrees. Because we aren't, until this policy comes into effect, tracking scholarship recipients post-graduation, I can't tell you how many of those were previously on government scholarships. I can tell you that going forward, we will be able to give that number and ensure that all of our scholarship recipients who are returning have sufficient opportunities to access support and services.
We're gonna take our luncheon break.
I've got one question.
Mr. Bush, you have one question?
Yeah. To the scholarship people, when you're deciding on, let's say we have, I know you said you have a cap on the amount of money per individual, but there are some cases where there's a child very bright being raised, and I'm hating to say this, but by a single mother more than single fathers. It's even more difficult than a child coming from a complete home with both parents there. Is there anything in any policy anywhere to say, well, that's a single mother raising a child, that we can help them with a little more? Is there anything, is this taken into consideration anytime or looked at in any way or form? Because why I'm saying this through you, Mr. Chairman, is that I've had young people who come from a single home. The government is able to give them something, but doesn't make any sense because they've only got so much. They need more that a single mother just cannot come up with, no matter she's working 2 jobs and she still can't help her child.
Mr. Chair, through you, in terms of support for students, we obviously, there's always a balancing act in terms of the amount that you have and amount that you can put forward. I mean, we have the policy as it relates to, as was outlined, the caps at the various levels. There's also other opportunities through the NAU for assistance for people that may be struggling as well to provide support to be able to live during this time. And I know that there's also work very closely, the Secretariat works very closely with the private sector to try to support in terms of finding additional support that's available in the private sector. But I think certainly, as I said, in terms of living the support for people being able to support themselves while they're in school, single parents or otherwise, those are policies which I know the NAU, through social services, as is commonly known, would be able to assist as well. So the support that's offered through the Scholarship Secretariat is for actual funding, but it is...
Mr. Chairman, through you, it's nothing about assessments needs unit. We're talking about the government helping with so much of the funds for college, but they can't find nothing. We're not talking about their needs here or even their food in college or so forth. We're talking about the education money. You know there's a thing. So you're going around the next corner and talk about other stuff. We're talking about university itself money, that the child or the mother can find somewhere to feed themselves. They just want to be able to find the funds to stay in university, to get a degree, because we know the FCO don't want that.
Mr. Chair, through you, I want to, the funding is certainly something that I know that once the funding, if the person qualifies for a scholarship, the scholarship secretariat works very closely with the individual to try to determine the best and appropriate place for them, giving their particular funding constraints as well. So one of the recommendations, which are one of the policy recommendations that have been put forward, which is being considered by Education Council, is looking at possibly introducing some form of means testing to see if certain people under certain conditions may qualify for additional funding. So that is something that's being considered, but we don't have an actual policy directive kind of approved by Education Council at this time to be able to say that's being implemented, but it is being considered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was what I was trying to find out. And like I said...
Sorry, member, I think I misunderstood when you were talking.
And to also take my hats off to the other lady who, the deputy officer who's talking about the internship. I was going to bring that up because I have some medical students are saying that with the local hospital, the HSA, they're only be told, oh, you come home, but you only get 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. So the fact that you're looking in to make sure that they get internship there while they're on summer is something that has to be looked at. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and just for your, thank you, member. We are actually working very closely with Health City, Cayman Islands, on trying to make sure that the students also get linked with their internship opportunities as well. So just for your benefit, you can let that individual know that they can apply to Health City, and they work very closely with the Scholarship Secretariat as well.
Thank you. We'll proceed to take the... Sorry, Mr. Eden, you have a question, sir?
No, this is just a statement. As I look around and observe 30-something people sitting around here from... I see 30-something people sitting around here from 9 o'clock, a handful of them or more. We know that they're not going to... If we could try, the ministers could try to refine, and we're only 5-10 minutes away from here, all of these people just sitting around, and I've seen it, not of this time, but from time immemorial. If we could try to refine and free them up, like the minister or the colleague from ex-colleague at the University College and others, that we haven't even come close to getting to them. Thank you. That was just a suggestion.
Thank you, Mr. Eden. We will now proceed to take the vote. Mr. McLean, with all Minister Rivers has to run on a personal matter, and then, so Minister Rivers, in the interest of your time.
Sure. I just, if the question is
quick,
we can take it now. I'd prefer to take the vote before
Mr. McLean?
we break for lunch.
Okay.
And
all right. So then we will suspend proceedings for the lunch break. But before I do that, I would like to acknowledge the presence of the Honorable Marlon Penn from the British Virgin Islands, Junior Minister for Trade and Investment Promotion, and he's a District 8 representative. Thank you very much for visiting us, sir. We wish you an enjoyable time in the Cayman Islands. Thank you. So we'll suspend proceedings. We'll resume at 3 p.m. Minister Rivers has something to attend to, and we will now suspend.